Hey, this is Scott at the XFed Homestead. Well, I had one of my subscribers ask me about how they should tend to their garden at the end of the year in order to best prepare it for next year. So today I'm going to talk about how to tuck in your garden beds. And since it's fall is the new spring, I'm hearing. So you got to prepare now in order to have a bumper crop in the spring. So let's get to work. We just had our first frost, and here you can see that the nasturtiums have all died down to the ground, and that the zinnias here, which were beautiful and colorful a week ago, are now somewhat decimated. So I'll have to pull those out. And when I pull out the vegetation, I get a row that kind of looks like this. Here's where my sweet potatoes were, and I dug up the soil. So now it's ready to be treated for the fall. Now I have 6 different rows in my garden. Each of them is about 25 to 30 feet long. And if you look here, you can see that some of them look pretty well prepared for winter and some still have a ways to go. Each of the rows is in various stages of fall construction. And typically what I do is I start to add a little bit of organic matter. In this row and this row, those two were the rows that I added just last year. So they're not very well established. They had their first crop on them this year, and they've got a ways to go. So what I'm going to do is increase the organic matter content of those 2 rows by adding a little bit of grass for starters. You can see on this row here, I put down some grass. There's a big lump of grass that I'm going to spread over these first 2 rows. And then once I put the grass down, I'll start to throw leaves on top of that. I got some of in this row, I have some leaves that are on top of the grass. And then after I do that, I'll put dirt on top of them. Now you can see in this first row, I have some grass down. I've taken the plants out, I put some grass down, then I put some leaves on top of it to add to that organic matter, and then I put some compost on top of that. And then I'll rake that smooth into beds so that they're ready to be planted for next year. But I'll have to do that for all the beds in the garden. So that row's all cleaned up, and we can dump this in the compost pile. Well, now that you see that everything's cleared off, you can see these rows have just plain dirt. And now I'm going to make them look like this row here that has some dried grass on it. It has a little extra grass, so I'm going to share the wealth between rows. And then I'm going to cover it with leaves. Now before I add anything to the soil here, I'm going to just straighten out the rows just a little bit so I don't have to do it all in the spring. I could take a string and get to it, but we're burning daylight here. I don't need a string out there to straighten them out. I'll do it by eye this time. Now I've got a whole pile of wood chips sitting in the driveway that I'm going to put in between each of these rows to keep the weeds down next season. but those wood chips also add to the bulk of the organic matter that I want to put on my rows. So that's going to be fertile soil in a few years when it breaks down. But I'll keep building it up, and that'll make those sweet potatoes grow nicer and those carrots grow deeper. So over time, it'll just better the garden. Plus, it makes it look pretty. All right, that looks good. Now I'm going to add some leaves to it. Well, my John Deere zero turn didn't let me down. So you can see it back there. Picked up a bunch of nice red maple leaves, and I can put these on top of the grass that I just laid down, and then I'll put the compost on top of that. It'll be a nice organic lasagna for the worms and the microscopic creatures this winter. That'll be nice. I make it a point to step over all my rows as much as I can. I don't want to step on them and compress them, especially when the worms and the mice are working so hard to make tunnels for me. I figured out that the mice were probably the ones this year who ate all my sweet potatoes. So I haven't seen that many mice around in a while. But as I dig up here, they're coming out and running around like crazy. So I think the idea of building an owl house this winter and getting an owl on the job, I think that would be a good project to do. And we'll see where it goes. It's a nice experiment. Now that looks pretty nice. It's come a long way, so we've got a lot of organic material on there. Now I'm going to put some compost on it, and that will really draw out the nutrients created by the earthworms. It'll draw the earthworms to us. They love eating these leaves, and if you think they don't eat leaves, they do. And they make their castings in the soil, and so now we're adding back to the soil instead of just taking away from it by growing our vegetables every year. So we give back, and like I said earlier, fall is the new spring. We're preparing for 6 months from now when we're going to be planting and taking more nutrients out of the soil, so we got to put those in now. So that's what this is all about. So the last step is to put the compost on here, create even more organic matter. We've had that compost growing and being created all year long, and even since last year. So now that's ready to go on here, and it'll age a little bit more over the winter and be ready for the spring. And that's what it's all about. Well, I'll tell you what, it'd take 2 or 3 wheelbarrows of compost to cover this row, but it's making it nice and thick. It'll all break down by next year, but that's really, really good stuff to put on the soil. You got to muscle it a little bit. It takes a while. I had to take my jacket off because even though it's 50 degrees out, it's getting getting warm. Well, the last step is to rake it in and make it look like a bed. In a couple of months, this will be covered with snow, and you'll see those nice rows waiting for the spring. So that's all I have to do to finish up this bed. In the spring, I'll clean this up and make the edges nice and sharp once it's all broken down. And well, that's all there is to it. Once I put that compost on there and make a nice bed, that's covering it, and it's all tucked in for winter. Well, that's all I have for now. We got the garden tucked in, at least this row. I've got several more to straighten out, a bunch more to add some leaves to once the rest of the leaves fall here in the yard. I even got some leaves from my neighbor today, which was fantastic, so I appreciate that. But I'll keep going until we're all tucked in for the winter. And I hope you learned something here on this episode of the X-Fed Homestead. We'll see you next time.